The future is finally here. All 6 episodes of the new RoboForce animated series are now streaming for free on Tubi. This is coming at you from Nacelle, which is the same company that put out shows like The Toys That Made Us, and they've bought up a bunch of older, lesser-known toy properties and are putting out new toys and comics and now animation of those properties in a joined universe that they're calling the Nacelleverse. And so each of them is going to get a season of animation starting with RoboForce. And so the future seasons they have planned are Biker Mice from Mars, Sectars, Warriors of Symbion, Cowboys of Moo Mesa, The Great Garloo, and Power Lords. And so this is a review of the long-awaited RoboForce animated series. I'm going to do a non-spoiler review, and then we're going to talk about some of the stuff you can get of RoboForce, both the vintage stuff and stuff based on the new cartoon. And so I've been talking about Nacelle for a while now. It's been over a year since I started covering it because of the comics that they've been putting out. So it's really cool to finally see that animated series come to fruition, their first cartoon finally streaming right now. And so it is based on a vintage toy line from the 1980s, but there's not a whole lot of connection between the old RoboForce and the new one. This is a complete reimagining, a complete reboot, and it's similar to what Hasbro did with G.I. Joe, right? G.I. Joe used to be these big military figures, and then they reimagined it as these 3 3/4-inch figures that were of a counterterrorism team, and that became the G.I. Joe that we know in modern times. Very similar here with RoboForce. But there are some things that do remain from the old toy line. The logo remains the same. The names of the robots remain the same, and there are some visual nods in the designs for the new robots that reference the old stuff. But the most important thing that they kept was the concept that these are still robots who are made by humans to serve humans, which makes it a very different concept from alien robots who come to Earth to save us that we see in shows like Transformers and GoBots. And so the new story they came up with is that RoboForce was designed by this scientist chick to be these cutting-edge crime-fighting robots, but when they were unveiled, they got overshadowed by this corporation that had these new robots called the 101s. And so the 101s became the crime-fighting robots that were everywhere and did everything for everybody, while RoboForce was forced to labor away in obscurity, just doing menial jobs. But then the 101s start going crazy, and so RoboForce has to save the day. And so the show doesn't take itself too seriously, but it does take itself seriously enough to actually have action and drama and stakes. And so this is really just meant to be a fun show that you can watch with your kids. And I'm sure everyone's going to have a different opinion about this show, just like everything else in life. But one thing I hope every human being on Earth can agree on is that the new theme song for RoboForce absolutely slaps.
Rising up from the ashes, RoboForce. We'll be there when the world comes crashing down. RoboForce. When all the other heroes start to fall, RoboForce. We'll heed the call.
Oh, that is seared into my memory banks. I actually wish I could delete it from my system, but it is very well done, very catchy, very infectious. I would imagine the most divisive thing about the show will probably be the animation. Now, I do think the animation at times is very impressive. They have a lot of things moving around. There's a lot of impressive fight scenes. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background. It's a very dense show. And I think RoboForce, for the most part, looks great. But the humans are very flat looking and very simplified. They look like flash animation. And it does take you out a little bit when you see that. However, I don't think this ever compromised the show's action or its drama, and at the end of the day, animation is a storytelling medium, and the most important thing is to tell that story, which I think they did here with this animation. I think in future seasons, we'll probably see the animation improve and be refined because that tends to be how these shows work. As far as the writing goes, I found it to be a mixed bag. A lot of times I was just like, every time there was a joke, but then sometimes I did legitimately chuckle at some of the humor. There were times when I wasn't quite sure what was going on with the story, like why did they blow up the power station at the end of episode 2? But then at the end of episode 3, we got the villain reveal and this incredible monologue that's some of the best written dialogue in the show. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I say it averages out to be a decently written show. It's certainly not as good as your best streaming series is, but it doesn't have to be a good, enjoyable show, which I think it is. The show does pay some direct tributes to the original toy line. There's a Dreadcrawler in there, and there's a 64 series of robots that have visual similarities to the original toy line, and one of them actually becomes an active character in the story. So does 64, who's actually my favorite character in the show because I just love her attitude. Characterization tends to be very simple, but there's only 6 episodes and a lot of characters, so that's kind of understandable. However, they are able to make each character distinctive, and I think the overall narrative that they came up with was pretty engaging. But it's also not exactly original. There's very familiar plot elements from Magnus Robot Fighter #1, very obvious tributes to Isaac Asimov, RoboCop, Star Wars. But part of the fun of the show is seeing how all of those elements get remixed into this new version of the future. In my review of the RoboForce comic, I actually showed a scene from the beginning of Magnus Robot Fighter #1 where Magnus was going around and seeing how robots were now doing everything for humanity and how overdependent humanity had become on robots. And I don't know if it was accidental or intentional, but they did a very similar scene at the beginning of the first episode of RoboForce, showing how everyone was so overdependent on the 101s and how they were doing everything for humanity. And lastly, yes, the show is part of a connected universe, but it's not done in an overbearing way. There's just a few references here and there to the other properties that don't really take away the focus that the show had on RoboForce. And yes, there is a post-credit scene on the final episode, so be sure to check that out. And so ultimately, I think this is a decent animated series, and I think it's certainly worth checking out. All right, guys, let's talk about where RoboForce comes from. So this is one of the original RoboForce figures. They are realistic style robots that, fought each other in outer space, and this is one of the villains, Enemy. Each of them had a unique action feature, but they also all had this button on the back, and when you pressed it, they would crush their enemies. And their bottoms are suction cups that can stick to any completely smooth surface. Now, the show's plot is inspired by something that was said by someone who worked on the original line, where he was talking about how they unveiled RoboForce at Toy Fair at the same time as Transformers, and he felt like they got overshadowed by Transformers and just couldn't compete with that. Now, that has become a retroactive story of why they failed, but it's kind of ignoring a lot of other things that were going on. The company that made RoboForce was sold that year. They only had a single episode of animation that was made instead of an animated series. And honestly, most toy lines in the 80s only lasted a year. The same thing was true of Sectars. The same thing was true of Power Lords. And as a child, I would have never thought of them as a competitor for Transformers. I would have never thought that I had to choose between Transformers and RoboForce, because RoboForce had a completely different play pattern. They had vehicles, they had a fortress, they looked like real robots. There was nothing else out there like them, and there has never been anything like them since. And it completely ignores that GoBots came before Transformers and competed with Transformers on the shelves for many years before Hasbro bought out Tonka. And so it seems to be part of this retroactive myth that nothing could compete with Transformers in the 80s, which just isn't true. I mean, Transformers is super successful, is one of the biggest brands in the world, and you don't have to exaggerate that for it to be a great brand. And as I mentioned before, RoboForce did have a single episode that aired as a TV special back in the day. It had beautiful animation by Ruby Spears, an iconic plot, and if you search on YouTube, you should be able to find it. RoboForce also had its story told through mini comics that were included with the figures, and these were just solid little action stories that were in the same vein as the Masters of the Universe and Sectars mini comics. And they even had wraparound covers, which is really neat. And there were also storybooks that were put out at the time, and these are aimed at children and very much written down to the children of the time. But they also tend to have these absolutely impressive, beautiful covers. I mean, this is just an amazing display piece. And the art on the inside is equally as impressive. I mean, this is just beautiful stuff. Oh my goodness, I would have loved to have had artwork like this on Masters of the Universe storybooks back in the day. For more information on the vintage line, be sure to check out the Max Steel RoboForce section of the Old Robots website. They have several pages of information, including stuff on the toys, stuff on all the different types of licensed merchandise there was. They have scans of the covers for books and mini comics, and scans of the interiors of books and mini comics so you can actually read them online. It was a tremendous resource that helped me find the merchandise I just showed you in this video. And that brings us around to the new modern RoboForce. And the first appearance of RoboForce of any kind in a comic book was last year in the Nacelleverse #0. This was followed by a 3-issue RoboForce miniseries with beautiful interconnecting covers by Dustin Weaver, and I did absolutely enjoy this miniseries. And if you like the animated series, you're absolutely going to want to pick this up. It gives some very interesting backstory for one of the characters in the cartoon. And yes, there are toys and merchandise of the new RoboForce Nacelle made figures of Max and Wrecker, and they were recently available at Walmart, but I'm not sure if that's still the case. But they are definitely available from Nacelle itself. You can go to the Nacelleverse site and look up their shop, and they have them for $35, which is about the price of a deluxe Marvel Legends. And there's also a Funko Pop out right now of Max 64, which is modeled after the original RoboForce figure of Max. And there are more figures that are planned that you can pre-order right now. But as of the recording of this video, there are some crazy high tariffs on U.S. imports of things manufactured in China, including action figures. And so I don't know how that's going to affect the plans of Nacelle or any other toy company or just the world in general. So I just wish everyone the best of luck. And I hope everything works out. I think that's one of the nice things about fiction set in the future, right? It helps put things in perspective. It helps remind us that throughout history, humanity has always had problems. We've always had issues, and we've always persevered. And there will be a tomorrow. There will be a future where we have conquered some of those issues, where we have solved some of those problems. And that future is going to have its new challenges. It's going to have its new problems. And it's going to be up to good people to come together to face those issues. And I do hope everything works out for Nacelle. I would love to see the other animated series they have planned. And I hope to see more RoboForce. I'd love to see a second season of that. All right, guys, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, crush your enemies. See ya.